I do want to add here, because you touched upon a very important topic, that Putin says we've been deceived again, we've been hurt. This is a most popular topic with the leftists on the West, the same leftist that he hates as well. The victim culture, and I'm just usually getting bad shivers from that, because what do you mean you were hurt? You should learn from the one who succeeded instead. And this in regards to all the emotions like BLM and now Putin, like BLM, like Robert DiAngelo, is coming out and saying the West, the white man, were always deceiving us. Full stop. And this perverted situation when, like in a fairy tale, the hero needs to be hurt in order for the hero to rise and hit back. Absolute populist ideology that is designed to affect masses but not to build empires. And B, it's very modern, leftist, and aimed at masses of people. And it's interesting, right? And that's with the backlight of Putin also having allies who can actually teach him what does it mean to stand on your own. Iran and Hussites. Because that's what they do, right? They're like Hussites, they're saying, well, here's the West, we don't like them, we'll be attacking their vessels. And we'll be sending everything that we have against them. Honestly and very directed. We don't share, we denounce, and we attack. Ayatollahs in Iran are saying that you're all Satanists, and we're fighting with you as with Satanists, no compromise. And we're ready to incur any losses along the way. And Putin comes here and says, West is evil, we're a special civilization, and we'll come out and struggle and wrestle and win over the West. Yet his rhetoric is essentially based on BLM pocketbooks, on the same methods. The great emperor who is crying like BLM does. And the main thing in his scary resistance against the West, he hosts Schwab and says that, well, you're helping us a lot, we'll still be cooperating with you. And with that, all the Russian propaganda is still talking about Schwab is a new normalcy, and Schwab is a representation of the Satan part of the world. Putin still hosts him in Kremlin. Putin still has enough liberals in his economic wing, and it's been a second and a half year of war or his active fight against the West, and he is still fulfilling the duties that he signed with the International Monetary Fund. Right? Imagine Ayatollahs doing the same, or Kim Chen-in doing the same. Right? Kim Chen-in is all proper against the West. They're flying their astronauts on the sun, they're resisting America, and they're not going to sign anything. It's rather clean with Ayatollahs as well. They have their own Marxist, communist, with some Confucius elements, right? And these guys in Russia are fully pro-Western rhetoric, a big running script on his forehead that they want to be liked and accepted by the West. And yet the rhetoric is the West is soulless, it's the civilization of Satan will win. Well, okay, if they are civilization of Satan, why are you following with their recommendations? And you still have a International Monetary Fund mission active in Russia and accept them in teaching you the basis of economy. Is that what your religious and whatever meta framework tells you to do? This is just deceiving. This is deceiving themselves, deceiving their people. They have complete mess in their heads. They're like puppets in a puppet theater who got and somehow became super powerful. History put them on a stage with a chance of defeating modernity, but they totally missed the mark, and now they're fighting for something absolutely different. And why I do value Yulia so much, and I actually agreed to this out of schedule conversation, even though I'm limiting my video appearances, I'm actually refusing a lot of requests for interviews. You wrote a very important thing, two things. that you are absolutely not going to take Putin in a liberal populist way, despite its being certain motivation and eclectic. And the second is that despite people considering you to be a very liberal, you did tell me, even before we discussed the details of this program, that you have personal attitude to the leaders of the current world who are afraid to say the word war, who are afraid to name things what they are, and that you despise all these political leaders who actually wage wars but are afraid to name them. Right? Because if you're fighting, you should be fighting a war. You shouldn't be calling it humanitarian intervention, special military operation. If you're doing that, you should be able to declare people's war, a holy war, whatever war you're fighting, right? And I do want to ask this question, Alexey, because this complex of progressive ideas keeps surprising me in the recent times, because according with these ideas, people who are conducting aggressive warfare are bad people by default. Everybody participating in these wars on their side are criminals. And then I have a question. In the recent thousands of years, I think humanity can count, 140,000 overall, archaeologically. But, okay, last 6,000 years, since there are some traces of governments and organizations like that, humanity was conducting wars like that, and they were always singing them and praising them. So, if we take this measurement and come to any classic literature, you can find interesting things. Like with this approach, you come to read Conan Doyle, and you figure out that Dr. Watson is just a warmonger who was fighting in Afghanistan, and Holmes is also rather a ruthless fellow because he has no objection to Watson being a soldier, an officer. And yeah, if you look at that from this angle, this is idiotic. And Putin actually buried all these times just with his war. I think he changed the concept of military expansions. He brought additional meaning to that, and I guess revived the attitude of that being something strong. But I do have a question, and that's why I think they become liars, because they dress absolutely aggressive politics into the words "we were hurt," and they become the worst kind of aggressor who wears a sheepskin and pretends that he is a victim. Another quote from my friend: "Why are you cheating? Just come there and take it if it's yours." And the moment, instead of honestly taking it back, you start to mimic things, you start to deceive people, that's when you're not becoming an empire. And right, empire is something that would come out and say, we are empire, we have rights and interest, and we offer everybody to sit down and come to an agreement on a certain list of questions that are important for us. If you don't want to agree peacefully, we will still take what's ours, but in the mode, if you haven't hidden, we're not guilty. But we'll be doing war, not a special military operation. We'll declare a full-scale war for what we think is important. We are ready to kill and die for that. And at the brink of it, we can actually destroy the whole world with our nukes, if that gets to that. But we still suggest that you should consider, do you want to negotiate or not? But again, we are an empire. We are trying to fight by the rules. We're not fighting with women and children. We're not fighting with cultures. We're fighting with certain bad people who do not want to agree with us or threaten us. That's what the empire should be doing. At any moment, you can stop the war by giving us those bad people, or if those bad people come out, repent, and then we'll forgive everybody. We'll sit down at the big table. We'll take the best of your advice, if it is a good one. And that's how the emperors and empires behave. But what we see now, we can remember Haji Murat, what was Tolstoy writing? Nothing except the deepest disdain or contempt to people who created such. There was not even hatred to those people. Just unacceptance and disdain. Oh, that was also Russian Empire in those times, right? Yes. Speaking of nations, by the way, I want to add here that one of the most successful things that Russian Empire did when they actually conquered the Baltic lands, because they had barons ruling there, they were immediately co-opted as the ruling society in that area, and that was one of the most successful deals with real estate in this case. I'll tell you that when the last emperor, Nikolai II of Russian Empire, was abandoned first by his own Orthodox Church. I don't know if you know that. It was not his commanders who abandoned him, but the church removed the chair of the emperor from the main cathedral after his abdication from throne. So I think the main curse lies on the Orthodox Church in Russia for that whole situation unfolding after. You know, I have a different attitude towards church. I even had another example on the tip of my tongue, but I'm not going to mention it now. And then 26 commanders of fleet, army, and all kind, they abandoned him after. Those who gave oath and promised to defend the throne and the empire. The only person who did not betray him was a commander from Nakhichevan, and he was the only one of the commander of the Southern Front, who said, no, I'm not abandoning because I gave my oath. And I will allow myself to read one poem now, who explains what is the correct Rus, or Russian Empire. It was written in 1870, when Bismarck, German emperor, he wasn't an emperor at that time, but he started the Franco-Prussian War, upon the results of which they shaped their eternal enemies, the Franks, and they gathered German Empire around Prussia. Theodor Tuchev wrote this poem, and it's called Two Unities. From overfilled with God's wrath cup, the blood flows, and the West is drowning in it. The blood will flow on the Slavic world too soon. Brothers and sisters join together. The oracle of our day said the unity can only be forged with metal and blood, but we will try to forge one with love and see which one is stronger. This is the civilization of love. Rus, the meaning of it is the civilization of love. And what Putin's people and Russian Federation people are doing, they're about anything but love. They're not about truth or conscience. There are some bright lights there. There are certain movements that are happening within that country, but it is hopelessly little. And normal Russian is living in a Russian citizen is living in a complete schizophrenia, and they've been growing their talent to explain that schizophrenia happening around them. When on one hand they're screaming that they want peace, 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 and integration and all, and internally the towers are announcing that Satanist West with LGBTQ and the rest need to be destroyed, and if they want to destroy us, we will burn the whole world in the nuclear ash. So they just foster schizophrenia in the minds of their own people. And managing these people is not exactly a joyful process, like Strugatsky wrote in their books. But yeah, they're continuing to drive their people mad. I would say if you're a proper empire, you need to have very straightforward propaganda. It needs to be very precise and very logical. Because if the West is Satanist, then you should be dealing with them as with Satanists. Otherwise, you're calling them that, and then you're members of all the Western organizations that will still take you. And you still want to trade with them, and you're still basically holding a third of their market. With Iran, the West is Satanist, and Iran is playing more honest as an ancient empire in this case. Good or bad, but at least they're honest, right? Relatively. And Putin declares that liberals are bad and will destroy them, but at the same time try not to arrest our money that we keep there. Well, if they're so bad, why are you keeping money in their currency in their banks? Right. I think they actually were arrested in most places. But how did they get there? This is just a deal with Satan, I think. Right. If you declare the West to be a Satan, then take the money away. So it's just hypocrisy of the lowest kind. And I have friends who are saying that war brings refreshing processes, that it'll cause anthropotype to change. They believe that instead of the hypocritical figures, we'll have more heroes and saints and creators and explorers, which is more in line with human destiny. But I'm very reserved about that. And I communicate a lot with people from the church side, but I don't see the change of anthropotype in the manner that you're describing, that they're describing. And for now, I can say that it is still post-modernity, corruption, hypocrisy, a lot of cheating, cruelty, and very gray primitivism, very much like Strugatsky were writing about. And don't see much of conscientious and straightforward people. Well, I do have one story, Alexey, in the interview that I cannot find a good answer for. That's when Putin is talking about his desire to join NATO, and he told Clinton about that, and Yeltsin before that wanted to join NATO as well. Yeltsin told to Clinton, I think Putin talked with Bush about that. But then Putin says, and here I see that Ukraine and Georgia are being taken into NATO. And I personally, and honestly, it seems to me not exactly a wise step on behalf of the United States. Here's when Putin can say, all right, I already jailed Khodorkovsky, that thing is bad, here I'm evil too. But in NATO there are countries like Turkey which are also not exactly democratic. And some, I guess, are different from the others, and some are taken, others are not, despite them being not too far apart. Well, I'm not sentimental in regards of democracy, Yulia. Democracy for me is power of Democrats, and I take it very in moderation. I'm not scared by things like dominance, empires, authoritarian style of leadership. I'm more concerned with the content. If it is a positive one, it could be a complete monarchy, a theological monarchy like in Vatican, for example. Worse than Iran in this regard, right? But nobody is bombing Vatican. Even though on the democratic scale, there are a lot of wrong things there, right? If you're coming with that scale measurement to them. I'm more concerned with the intentions. This is what the Christians are going to be judged by, not by the consequences, but by the intentions. When democracies suffer, I do not necessarily suffer along. Sometimes it may be a necessary process. But whether it's hypocritical or not, that's what's important. And again, when you pretend to be, when you aspire to be an empire of Rus and Russia, then you have to behave accordingly. Then others will perhaps believe you, and you might even believe yourself. Otherwise, it is just some post-modernity sci-fi, digital punk style with some elements of perversion of the times of Ivan the Terrible. All right, since in this interview we started to discuss and bring up uncomfortable questions, which people usually try to avoid because they're the most uncomfortable and most painful, then talking about the borders in this war. General Syrsky, who was born in Vladimir, the person who was commanding the bombing squad that was destroying Mariupol, his last name is Atroshenko, I think, and he was the one who was privy to destruction of Mariupol, an ethnic Ukrainian. General Vladimir Alexeyev is Ukrainian by ethnicity. Main surgeon, military surgeon in Russia is Ukrainian. And Dr. Volna, who left Moscow, and then he's in Kiev now saving Ukrainians. Another case was Ilya Kiva, who initially was on one side, but then something did not work out, and he was first teaching Ukrainians how to deal with the Russian world, and then he flipped, ran to Russia, and now we're hearing the same thing, only with a different sign. So how these things happen? Well, let's look at the direct logical connections from the facts that you have been discussing. First of all, this war is not an ethnic war, because on both sides we have a commander-in-chief with Russian origins, right? And you have commander of paratroopers who is Ukrainian on the Russian side. And Teplinsky, by the way, I think he's a Pole, a Ukrainian of the Polish descent. So it is not an ethnic war. Which kind of war is that? Political? Political war is when two political systems clash, democracy and dictatorship, right? Here everything is also on a very shaky ground, because during the war the whole criteria changed. We talked about that before, but when in dictatorship there are volunteers, tens of thousands, who come to fight a war, and in democracy people get caught and being thrown to the front by force. Well, Putin is paying them big money, Alexei. All right, why we are not paying big money? Perhaps it's a question to the budget, maybe, and also maybe the question of even wanting to pay that money, right? I think this is the question of not a budget, but of supported policies. Ukraine for 32 years was conducting policies that were not supported materially. Ukraine was telling its people a fairy tale about NATO, and people were following that carrot about the beautiful ideals of democracy. And there are some elements of democracy in Ukraine, but they're not exactly elements of democracy. These are elements of historical anarchy that are using democratic mechanisms. But it is more anarchy than democracy in Ukraine. Well, Alexei, I wish we had your problems. Oh, I understand, Yulia, right? And to some degree, this is perhaps a war of democracy with authoritarian regime. But in its core, I think this is different. People are dividing and taking sides not because they're Ukrainians or Russians, and Russians not because they're smart or dumb, even though it's a serious grouping. But they separate for the ones who are truth and conscience, and then the others who are for hypocrisy. So that surgeon, Andrei Volna, who moved to Kiev, regardless of his passport, nationality. Do you have the nationality in your passport in Russia? I don't know. Well, we don't have one in Ukraine. See, we are considered to be experts and we don't know if Russian passport has it. Side note from privateer station, yes, Russian passport does have a nationality in it. And that surgeon did according to his conscience. He moved to Kiev. And there are people who get order, they jump in their plane, they push a button, they launch a missile, killed 20 civilians, mother with children burnt alive, and then he goes home, plays with his kids, and his wife is telling children that their dad is doing an important, dangerous work. He is defeating Nazis and he is serving the country. So that goes up to your own conscience. Don't you think, Alexei, that Putin had one more goal with his propaganda and with this horrible treatment of prisoners of war and not seeing not only noble fighters in your enemy, like it was customary in imperial aristocratic societies, but just a human even, is to cause proper reaction on the other side and make the war as atrocious, as angry as possible. Because you were talking before about cognitive warfare, that in modern world, most wars are cognitive wars. Not most of them, Yulia, when the countries know how to do that. Very few know how, but some do, yeah. So how much in this regard, if we evaluate the efforts of Ukrainian propaganda from this point of view, when everything that you said opened very wide range for Putin attacking propaganda. Guys, do not go to fight. You're not the empire. In the meantime, Ukraine was using that field for different purpose. They were saying that, guys, you are orcs, you are non-humans, and they were taking them as, essentially portraying them as animals, as dog pigs. And I understand, the hatred is the feeling that's on very rare occasions is not mutual. But how do you think it is proper? Well, let's first declare that neither Russia nor Ukraine can conduct cognitive warfare. The highest achievement of both sides is a very cheap-made, very helter-skelter concocted psyop. Something like, hey, you didn't like the post of your neighbor in chat, in a Viber or somewhere. Oh, that's a psyop. He is a spy. But there is a cognitive warfare being done against both sides on a different level. By whom? By whom? Who is that scary Satan here, Alexey? By those who know how to conduct that. I think, Alexey, we're well fighting on our own without the third party. Well, cognitive warfare is more complicated. You cannot do it without understanding who you are, being honest, and it doesn't work if you're honest and if you see reality as is. Cognitive warfare is picking its prey among those who are refusing to accept reality. It cherry picks the things that you want to see in a certain light. All right, let me translate what I mean in an Orthodox religious dictionary. And those people who listen to me, they know that I'm turning to them, and there are different people listening to you and watching you from very different places and very high places too. So, dear people, Orthodox Christian cannot hate. God is where love is. If there is hatred, there is no God. There's just Satan. What Orthodox Christian can experience in war? They can experience rage. Because rage is a particular case of God's wrath that is being channeled through human. But there is a fundamental difference between rage and hatred. Hatred is a disease of ego. It's a cancer of soul. A person is sitting on his sofa and is hating, and the reason for hate very often is a powerless fear when you cannot do anything. And wrath and anger is a different feeling. This is when you channel action through you, when you have to go and do something. And in this is the main difference between degrading and falling apart at home and doing nothing, and a live action based on your beliefs is the main difference. In this war, there is very little rage and very much hatred, plenty of hatred. So for me, it's an indicator that certain cognitive specialists are working rather well on both sides of the conflict. Remember, in 1941, in Soviet Union, some smart people wrote a song on the precipice of that Second World War. Let the people's wrath bubble as a noble wrath bubble as a wave. These people had a very deep understanding. They didn't write about hatred. They didn't write about justified hatred. Hatred doesn't bubble. It was a noble wrath. And since we're talking about Rus and Russians, and those who've been Russians, I guess, who will be Russians, the ones as we describe, that they should keep in war that noble rage, noble wrath. This feeling can also be adjourned by love, because you can feel wrath to your enemy, but you can also feel love to him on a different level. But when you hate somebody, there is no place for love. There will only be space for destructing hatred. And that's where all, in my opinion, all the horrors of this war are stemming from. Given that, first of all, the war is being degraded as a process, but also that instead of wrath and rage and that group of feelings, we have hatred. And this is a path down. But for you and me and those who take themselves as Russians, those who think they're Russians, they're Rus Russians. They're different. Have you watched a movie with Brad Pitt, Fury? I actually worked on it, based on seminar on it. Sorry, I did not. I'm not too strong in movie department. But I do have one last question that we may want to finish the show with. Before we go there, let me finish, Yulia. So he's playing a sergeant, a commander in a tank at the end of war, and he's teaching a young fighter who joined his tank crew. He's teaching him fury, and he's teaching him to be a real man. And he's dying at the end, but he basically inoculates him into the world of warriors. And as somebody who dedicates quite a bit of time of my life to different psychological elements, I think you will enjoy that. So, fury, rage, not hatred. And now your question. Well, my question is more like additional question to our topic. Why do people get upset so easy these days? Why do they become victims so easily these days? And the victim is not an emperor. Right, in the modern world, there is a figure, Yulia, that can be called a therapeutic human. That figure cannot do a lot of things that we normally think humans would. This person needs additional pills or additional kind of support to even withstand a lecture. And according to different sources, up to 70% of American students, they take different medications one way or another in this regard. So this is a weak and very torn apart entity that instead of proper foundations of European civilization, which combined understanding, knowledge, cultured emotion, that was replaced with relativism, so that every truth became relative and not complete. And then the values also of a proletariat, of small, decreasingly small virtues and values. That's why I was saying that Trotskyism has prevailed and won in the world. In the 70s, both the United States and Soviet Union lost to the Trotskyists. It's just the speed of defeat was different. For Soviet Union, collapse came in 91. For the United States, the collapse is now 70+% of teachers in American universities are Trotskyist or proto-Trotsky. Very few still hold the fort. And what Trotskyism is, it's an ongoing cultural revolution. It's continuous liberation of the proletariat. At first the proletariat, and then the smallest groups, transgender, LGBT, and the like. And then they'll soon, I guess, be fighting for the rights of insects and natural resources. And it also encompasses emotional sphere. You have to be as easy to be harmed emotionally. This is the virtue with this civilization. And if you can also tie that to be some self-identification, then you are the king. For example, you can come to the bicycle championship and say, I'll participate on a motorbike in it, because that's how I identify. And then you go to court and appeal for your rights there. It sounds funny, but that's exactly the hyperbole of the same thing when they declare that they want to use female bathrooms while being men. When they're physically stronger by the fact of being men, they still want to compete, physical men, they still want to compete in female championships. So when Putin comes out with his interview, by the vocabulary and the content of his interview, he behaves exactly in the same fashion. But you cannot build Holy Empire or Holy Rus on those Trotskyist measurements, LGBT, transgender, BLM, and other kinds of revolutions. And if you want to build empire and that Holy Rus, you need to behave as an emperor, you need to have vocabulary as an emperor and nobility as an emperor, and a certain height and wisdom, and behave yourself constantly rising the ethic plank to match the high name of Holy Rus. But otherwise, if you're just declaring that, yeah, let's bow to the monasteries and do all that, but you're still using LGBTQ dictionary, and you're talking from the position of being emotionally wounded, that is Pelevin's cyberpunk stuff, with elements of post-meta digital punk and traditional art vignettes. This is what the current Russian world is. It's very far removed from the Rus Empire. As some people are writing in the chat, you cannot build Holy Rus by Trotskyist methods. Indeed, Alexey, and I think this is the main conclusion of our stream today. Alexey, sorry for interrupting you, or you're done? No, I think I'm done on this. All right, I think this was a good stream overall. Sorry, everybody, that we did not talk directly about Avdiivka and a lot of other current events. We went into a meta field here. You know, Yulia, my mom told me back in the day, Sonny, never look at the actual, work on the eternal things. That's why I try to focus my work on the much larger scape. There are a lot of other bloggers and commentators who tell people about where did the front move, where did the detachment go, who died where. Let's talk on the eternal subjects here. And I do value you, Yulia, a lot as one of the few people I can talk with on these metaphysical and just higher framework. I have to say here that, Alexey, you're also very well respected by a lot of people who acknowledge that you, even when digging into the details of the front, you can still look and perceive it from the much higher level. Right, that's my favorite. I like looking at things at large. I try not to deep dive into every rabbit hole that's possible. All right, that's exactly what we shall do. Unless you want to add something about Rus at the end of it. Perhaps the topic still wasn't fully explored? Oh no, Yulia, I think we explored it fully. Rus is a civilization of conscience, truth, and light. It counters modernity, which also was supposed to go that direction, but unfortunately, due to the Faustian deal in the West, it went in the direction of control. And I hate the modern West society, the modernity society, which escalates its control levers. I think we're present at the end of it. It started with the 30-year war, and it's finishing now with the 30-year war, I think, I'm afraid. And we'll try to do our best to make sure that the civilization of conscience, truth, and delight follows it. And frankly, I don't give a damn about borders. I think in 15 years, all the borders in at least Eastern Europe will be reviewed. I frankly do not care about what the borders will be. What is important is that for conscience, truth, light, and holiness, if you want, and happiness to win. That's what I want to fight for. And I will fight for that. I fought for this before, I'm still fighting for it, and I will continue fighting for it. I have never strayed away from this course. And we'll try with love. All right, Alexey, thank you so very much. I, on my side, of course, remind our viewers to not forget to subscribe if they have not done that yet, to your channel, to my channel, to Privateer Station if you are listening or watching that in English. And I will also hold a separate stream about democracy and overall suffrage. Tell him big hi from myself. Oh, I did have a stream with Yudin. Perhaps Privateer will translate that soon, but I'll be talking about why am I not a fan of everybody's election right about the suffrage. I'm also not a fan of voting right for everybody. I think I'm more leaning towards Robert Heinlein and Starship Troopers concept of citizenships with some changes, slight deviations from it. I'm simple man, simple woman, Alexey. I'm leaning to certain limitation in the rights to vote, because Starship Troopers were far, but Florence was not too far. Or another story, Yulia. Do you want me to finish it with an anecdote? Stalin is sitting at the evening movie viewing. He liked to watch movies in the evening. And he was actually reviewing all the movie production in Soviet Union.
So he's sitting, watching another new movie with ministers, and he's leaning to the Minister of Culture and saying, "Comrade Minister of Culture, don't you think that the main actor looks very much like Comrade Stalin, especially with the mustache?" And the minister turns to him and says, "Well, this is the allegory, this is the meaning we wanted to put in the movie, how he struggles in the village, how he tries to raise collective farming and win over the hecklers and the enemies and go conquer. This is good." But I'm sitting here and thinking, why do we need two Stalins in our country? Indeed, we don't need Comrade Stalin. Let's execute one. And I even know which one. This one on the screen. And also let's execute the whole production team, editor, lighting people, Minister of Culture, heads of cinematography, Moscow movie making, production, also Leningrad, Odessa and Dovzhenka and the other setups, and execute all the companies who are supporting them and all the movie theaters, and then Beria on the left. Hey, Comrade Stalin, maybe just shave the mustache from the main character? Stalin takes a pause, thinks and says, or that. One thing here, Alexey, I was thinking, what did I forget to say? When we were discussing that Putin is not behaving like a big creator of the empires, for example, how he treats Ukrainian prisoners of war, he treats the same way Russian culture, Russian people, Karamurza, Olexiy, adding from privateer station, Navalny as well. That stream was recorded before that. When Tsar Nicholas said, "I'll be your censor" to Pushkin, were difficult relations even back then, but Pushkin was not sent to exile for 25 years. True, Yulia, but I also want to say that Ukrainian propaganda is also funny in this case. We wrote off all the Russian culture into the enemy camp here, and we removed all the Pushkin monuments in Ukraine, which I was always telling them, okay, you renamed Bulgakov streets and you removed Pushkin. These two people brought Ukraine into the world arts arena. Bulgakov brought Kiev with his works, and I was meeting some academicians here in Europe who are studying Russian language to read Dostoevsky and Bulgakov in the original language. Yet in Ukraine, we kicked Pushkin and all these guys out. And Pushkin, who wrote about the clash of empires and brought Ukraine into the global context. So my usual appeal is, well, write something analogous to that. Because otherwise it appears that your government politics is only in destruction, in removal of things and values. Write something analogous to that. Write a replacement. I would love to see something else written in Ukrainian language that would bring Ukraine on the world arena in that new quality. How come that in 30 years you failed to produce anything like that, and then you're removing the existing ones? And we do have in Ukraine the lists of Russian known cultural milestones and cultural persons who need to be removed from Ukraine. But if you go through that list, most of these creators from the Russian Empire days, they were repressed by the Tsar regime, one way or another. They were fighting essentially against lack of freedoms in that empire, and they were repressed. They all suffered from Tsars and the emperors. But our folks at Ukraine don't get it. Another important thing is that even though they suffered from the emperors, it was very personalized. Nobody was hiding behind some laws or generic blankets and stuff. In each case, the emperor or the Tsar would take responsibility on his own shoulders and tell Pushkin or Dostoevsky or somebody else that, hey, I'm taking responsibility for censoring your work. And in Pushkin, it's the whole other thing. He is creating that gray Russian Empire, that shadow aspect of it, which Saltykov-Shadrin, another classic, hated so much, that shadowy aspect. This is the one that's destroying now Russian oppositioners and cultural actors. And Pushkin, being a student of legalese and a fan of legal systems, is using that shadowy aspect, the faceless aspect of the empire. Russian czars actually spent time talking to each of the Decembrists after a bloody attempt to take over. He hung only 5 of them and talked for hours with others, trying to understand why did they not like him, why they were so against him. Right? There are a lot of examples in the empire history where czars were more direct and more detailed. This is the cannibalism what's happening in Russia now, that it's very personless. It doesn't have a personal aspect. It's just a gray Putin established legalese. And this is a part of the system. When you want to really create a good system, you first need to give a person a way out, to repent, to say, I'm sorry. You talk to the person, you discuss why is he proponent of certain ideas. And then if the person persists, then you can take a decision and execute. Otherwise, hiding behind some courts, behind some investigation systems, behind some faceless events that supposedly have no relation to the government, what is that about? We're not even talking about those talentless people who are accusing Olexiy, Akunin, or Bykov, or the best cultural representatives of Russia today, accusing them of everything and writing them off as foreign agents and making sure they leave the country. All right, Yulia. Civilization of truth has, and conscience and mercy, has a different side to it, right? Another story, when a daughter of one of the commanders of detachment, pretty high rank, when he was caught stealing and he was stripped of his nobility rank and sent to Siberia, and his daughter, it took her 1.5 years to get to the emperor. When she was received, he asked her, what do you want? And she answered, I'm here to ask for my dad. And that cannibal, that horrible Nicholas I, looked at her and said, the man who brought up a daughter like this perhaps could make a mistake but cannot be bad human. And he ordered to restore his rank, his salary, and his position. Not a single legalese court in the West can do that. This was the personally taken responsibility. This is our civilization. Yes, sometimes you have to make horrible decisions upon yourself, but if it is done properly, that's worth it. When Tsar told Pushkin, I'll be your personal censor, actually protecting him from hundreds of other censors. And Benkendorf, who was the head of secret chancellery, was he Andrei, or what's his name? Duke Benkendorf, let me remember. No, Andrei was his great-grandson, whom I knew in Kiev. What did he choose as an emblem for his third chancellery? Alexander was his name, right? Alexander. He chose a handkerchief, the one that he was supposed to wipe the tears of people with. It now looks funny, but they believed in it. And Alexander I, what did he suggest as a holy union? The union of wisdom, righteousness, and light. The union as he wanted to restore the meaning and light in Europe and truth. And when he saw what Talleyrand and the rest turned this union into an instrument of control, according to the historic legend, he went into a monastery. This is the civilization I'm for. But what is currently being performed in modern-day Russia with that pseudo-Trotskyist, Western, liberal, semi-fascist mixture that kills everything bright that exists in Russia today, this is not empire, and this is not about Rus and Russians. And on this beautiful thought that Putin is not Russia, we conclude this stream today. And I want to repeat the words of Alexey, that in this war there is too much hatred and too little rage. I think these are fantastic words. Thank you, Alexey. This was Yulia Latynina and Alexey Arestovych. Brought to you by Privateer Station.